Alright, to begin, the lecture I chose to give off on my essay journal questions was the number one, the briefly outlining Turner's thesis and other significant paradigms that Western historians have argued to try to explain the West. And then also why the paradigms are significant in understanding our history. To begin, the reason why I chose this was because the Turner's thesis really helped throughout all the lectures and kind of give a point of why the West came about or what it was. So to begin, the Western history of the United States is filled with people settling out in the West. Our history tells us land purchases, trading with Native Americans, and building new cities in the West. So in 1893, there was an essay delivered called "The Significance of the Frontier in American History." This was done by this is known as the Turner Thesis, and this is basically explaining that the frontier has ended. Now, this shocked everyone, and I found it very important from Limerick's book how she explains Turner's thesis argued the center of American history was found at the edges, and the frontier was the outer edge of the wave, and the meeting point between savagery and civilization. So the U.S. Urged people of Christian faith to go out west to preach to the Indians. And also, as the gold rush came about, towns flooded the West. These examples show that Turner's thesis seemed kind of real, and some at this point less climaxing. Because once something ends and you're not really expecting it to, it's kind of leaves you with a dull feeling. Anyways, after Turner declared his thesis, there were many people who did not consider the frontier of America was actually over. I kind of thought this was more of some move by the U.S. president that imperialism came into play, so we can widen the country. President Theodore Roosevelt didn't want the frontier to end and felt that we needed to expand, and he did this by expanding further into the Caribbean and the Pacific Islands. President Roosevelt continued to argue the myth of the frontier and let it known that Americans can preserve the culture of the West. And because it was being swept away by the industrialization. This also shows why Turner felt that the frontier was over and the U.S. was moving into a new chapter in our history. And so Theodore Roosevelt knew the importance of the West in our country, and he even tried to live it after experiencing some tragic death in his life. In about 1884, he resided out to a ranch out west, and there were some cowboys that ridiculed him, but he stood up to one bully and landed, as they say, a lucky punch from our textbook, The American West, the new interpretive of history. So from Butler and Lansing, they mentioned how people couldn't believe that the frontier was over, especially when they walk outside the house and they can't see their neighbors. So when there's still so much frontier left, or so much of the land left to settle, how can this frontier be over? However, basing off frontier from Turner's thesis, explaining that bringing in civilization to the savagery. Our history kind of states that we have done so. And an example of that, a sad example, is we forcibly moved Native Americans off their land and over so we can use it for our selfish reasons. And this was forcing the Indians off their land so we can bring railroad by encouraging people to come out west. Now, this is an example of how the industrialization has moved into America as a new chapter. And as we move the Native Americans into reservations, we're really forcing them to live our culture and take away some of theirs. So in conclusion, the Turner's thesis has inspired people to look deeper into the West, not exactly where it is, but as to an idea of what the West meant. And that is still going on today.